It's time for another book versus adaptation where I watch the adaptation, then read the book and decide which you'll like better based on the plot's characters and relationships. Today, we're doing a deep dive on Stephen King's masterpiece, Salem's Lot, and its recent HBO Max adaptation. Salem's Lot, originally published in 1975, uses the supernatural elements to delve into small-town American life at the time and explore themes of corruption, loneliness, community, and shared responsibility, among others. So, how does the Max adaptation hold up? Is it worth your time? There will be spoilers for both the book and the adaptation in this video, so if you don't want to be spoiled, use the chapters down below to skip to my overall thoughts at the end. Salem's Lot follows many characters, but Ben Mears is usually considered the protagonist of the story. Ben is an author who returns to Jerusalem's Lot to research the Marston house, a house where he had a terrifying experience as a child, in the hopes that he'll find inspiration for his next novel. When two brothers go into the woods and only one returns, it becomes pretty clear that not everything is what it seems in this small Maine town. And the problem is far darker and more dangerous than Ben could have thought imaginable. Let's start off with what I thought was better in the book when it comes to the plot. The book offers a lot more context for the story. You slowly witness this quiet American town turn to the undead. There is a lot more world building around the vampires in the book as well. And while this story is pretty straightforward vampire fare, it still felt important to include. Barlow, your main antagonist, is so much better in the book. Honestly, I feel like the adaptation flipped the portrayals of Straker and Barlow in the book. Barlow is supposed to be this kind of charismatic Dracula-esque figure, and that's definitely not what we get in the movie. In the movie, he's pretty much just like a straight-up monster. But the thing that stood out most for me about reading the book was the depth of the themes in this novel, using the spread of vampirism to explore the death of small-town American life, and to investigate the secrets that often lie behind closed doors in a community like that. That was completely lost in the adaptation. Here's what I think was better in the adaptation as far as the plot. Susan is definitely a better character in the movie. I do give the book some grace because it was written in the 70s. But Susan does some of the stupidest shit in the book. Like, she has no sense of self-preservation whatsoever. Overall, I feel like the movie definitely updated the female representation to feel more true to today. I liked Jimmy as a character in the book. I think that Alfre Woodard was fantastic as Dr. Cody in this movie. And if you've followed my channel for a while, you know that I'm always willing to give up a little bit of accuracy to have more diverse representation, especially when adding that representation doesn't take away from the awesomeness of the character. Yes, this makes me woke, and I won't apologize for it. I kind of loved the visual effect of the glowing eyes instead of the red eyes that we get in the book. The red eyes in the book just will automatically make me think of Twilight, and instead, what the adaptation shows makes them look very like animalistic, like, light reflecting off of an animal's eyes in the woods. Yet, because it's constantly like that, it felt very supernatural. Here's what I think could have been better for the plot overall. The adaptation had an issue with spiraling changes. Changes like not having Matt have a heart attack and going to the hospital ended up creating a trickle-down effect where the story kept having to change until it was pretty different from what you get in the book. And honestly, I think the heart of the different character deaths is completely lost in the adaptation. Matt's death in the book is so brutal because it isn't that he gets turned into a vampire. The character arc for Father Callahan is almost completely reversed to what we get in the movie, and his fate ends up so much darker and more interesting in the book. Even the way they defeated the vampires at the end of the movie just wasn't as interesting as what you got in the book. And by making Barlow a straight up monster in the movie, you actually lose a lot of terror. It's a lot less scary to kill a mindless monster who just wants to eat you than a mindless monster who wants to eat you but doesn't seem like a mindless monster. For characters, I honestly had a problem narrowing my focus to 3 characters because there are so many perspectives in the book. I knew I wanted to go over Ben and Mark, but picking the 3rd character was really hard. So I ended up picking the one that I thought had the most interesting character arc, and that's why I chose Father Callahan. As I mentioned earlier, his character arc in the movie is almost completely the reverse of what we get in the book. They emphasized his weakness in the movie, and while I did find his death terrifying in the movie because of his loss of faith, his death was just so much better in the book. As I've already touched on, this movie needed Barlow to be a more active villain than he was. The abilities that he portrays in the book as a man of faith were really cool to see in the book, and we didn't get any of that in the movie. Instead, they played up on the idea of holy ground a lot more in the movie than they did in the book, even though it is mentioned in the book. And I find it so interesting that Father Callahan, an alcoholic in life, is able to resist the darker temptations of being a vampire. His end was so dark and heartbreaking in the book, and I'm kind of mad the movie changed it. Mark, honestly, is pretty great in both the book and the adaptation. But of course, I liked the added diversity in the movie. I also really like the scenes that we get with Mark where he's pulling together information about vampires from his different comic books in the movie. However, the movie doesn't give him enough of a chance to be weak. We barely see his reaction to losing his parents in the movie, and it's really sad in the book. And it was still sad even though his parents weren't in the book very much. Ben's backstory is completely changed in the adaptation. He comes to town investigating the death of his parents in a car crash as opposed to the death of his wife. And because of that, his relationship with Susan seemed a little less impactful. Like, if you're a widower and you're trying to open yourself up to falling in love again, that woman would have to be pretty amazing for them to be able to let you not forget, but to set aside or move beyond the death of someone you previously loved. I also think he has more personality in the book. No offense to Lewis Pullman, I think he did the best with what he had, but the complexity of his character was just missing for me in the adaptation. He does express some pretty problematic thoughts in the book, but I can forgive it as, again, this book was written in the 70s and is a product of its time. The book starts after the events that take place in Salem's Lot with Ben and Mark. And I think if that had been included in the movie, it would have rooted us a little better in the characters of Ben and Mark in the movie. The relationships that I want to talk about from this adaptation are all of the different types of relationships that Ben has with the different characters in this book. So let's start with Ben and Susan. Their relationship in the movie is very cute and updated for modern standards, but it also loses a lot of its depth that the book has. They have a lot better banter in the book because Ben is not as wooden of a character in the book. And while Susan's death is brutal in the movie because they're just not quite quick enough to give her that cure, but the way she dies in the book is heart-wrenching and pretty graphic, so maybe that's why they changed it. One of my favorite things about this book is the portrayal of platonic love between Ben and Matt and Ben and Mark. This is something I fear our society as a whole has really lost. The idea that Ben could have real and true platonic love for his friend and not be ridiculed for that. Ben and Matt in the book were truly depicted as having almost like a platonic soulmate connection. They were kindred spirits. And aside from the platonic love, I also love that this is a generational friendship. Some of the most impactful relationships in my life have been with people who were of a different generation than I was. I learned so much from those people, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. And I also really loved Ben and Matt's shared moral purpose. Both of these characters are driven by a deep sense of responsibility to keep the town safe. This last point, I feel like was pretty well represented in the book and the adaptation, but what the adaptation misses are those first 2 points about their relationship. I mean, yes, it's a generational friendship in the movie as well, but it just feels a little rushed because we don't get as much time with them in the movie. And let's wrap up relationships by talking about Ben and Mark. In the book, Ben really steps up at the end, becoming kind of a foster parental figure for Mark after his parents die. This is something that is given a nod in the adaptation as they leave the town together, but doesn't have the chance to develop in the movie like it does in the book. Again, here you have another connection across generations, and I kind of loved how this relationship kind of felt like Ben and Matt passing the torch to be a relationship with Ben and Mark. I kind of hate that they separated Ben and Mark for the climax of the movie, because one of the things that's so great about the climax in the book is how well Ben and Mark work as a team. Ben has the experience and Mark has the resourcefulness, and that gets results. All right, let's talk about my feelings overall on which I think you'll like better. I think it's fairly obvious at this point that I personally enjoyed the book more. If you want a really good, scary social commentary with complex characters and a complex villain, I'd recommend the book. If you want a fun vampire romp that has a good cast that you don't have to think too hard about, then the movie is still worth a watch. Just go in knowing that it's very different from the book. If you like this video, try watching my book versus adaptation video for Joe Hill's The Black Phone next. Let's see what stories tomorrow brings.